Hey guys, Landon with 515 Hosting Web Design, 515hosting.com, with another episode of Hosting 101 with 515 Hosting. Today we're going to talk about whether or not you should have your web designer also be your web host. You're probably thinking, what type of question is that? 515 Hosting and Web Design. Obviously, you should, but the answer is actually probably not, unless you do things like 515 Hosting does it. We'll talk about that at the end because I have a unique approach I take that is the best of both worlds. But let's talk about sort of the behind the scenes of how things often work, some of the problems associated with this, why it happens, and then you can determine for yourself what's going to be the right decision to make for your own company. So first of all, why is this something that even occurs? Why is this a question? Well, for one thing, web designers are often looking for residual consistent income. When I build a website, that is a one-time fixed charge. I get a charge for the hours of labor, and then it's off to the next project. But that's not consistent income. But because web hosting is required for a website to exist, and because web hosting can be more of a utility type fee, that becomes consistent residual income. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there are some problems that can exist if the web designer hasn't thought about them ahead of time. And I don't think a lot of web designers are malicious in this approach. I just don't think a lot of them have dealt with the problems that exist until it's too late. And a lot of businesses don't know what they don't know, so all they see is convenience, and that makes it seem appealing to them when their web designer says, "Hey, I want you to sign up for this web hosting plan with me. It'll make things a lot easier. I can handle all of it for you. I'll make sure it stays online." Maybe even in some cases, they require it. Say, "Hey, we're not going to build your website unless you also pay me monthly hosting." So there's all different ways that this can be structured. But here's the problems that exist. And there's three. So there's a technical problem, there's a financial problem, and there's an ownership problem. Typically, the way that web designers do this, especially if they're freelancers, is what they'll do is they'll buy a shared web hosting plan at some economical web hosting company, HostGator, GoDaddy, and then they will put all of their customer websites into this one shared web hosting account, because these hosting companies will come at them and say you have unlimited resources, but that's really not true. All of these servers have finite resources. And often what's allowing you to have unlimited resources is that as long as they don't overload the servers on the number of users, they can have one particular user spike in traffic without really affecting all of the others. So the idea is that each shared web hosting plan is for one individual. They get so much of the pie, and that no one individual is going to take up too much of the pie. But that becomes a problem whenever that one individual is really representing multiple individuals. Because now instead of having one company in a shared web hosting plan, you've got 100 companies, however many companies that web designer is hosting in that plan. And it's really not designed to be that way. So from a technical limitation, you are now at the mercy of the traffic of other websites. And if you're, say for instance, you had your own web hosting plan, your own shared web hosting plan with that company, and somebody else's website spiked in traffic, they're probably going to throttle that particular website so that your website can still be okay. But if your website exists in a shared web hosting plan and one of the websites inside that plan is throttled, it's going to throttle all of the websites inside that plan. So now you're basically paying for an account, but you're not getting the maximum performance of the account. That brings us to the financial problem. Often these economical web hosting, shared web hosting plans will be, I don't know, $15, $20 a month. And these web designers will pay that, put all of these websites in there, and then they'll turn around and charge all of these companies $20, $50 a month. That is huge margins. They're paying for that web hosting plan with just one account. Everything else beyond that is profit. And I don't necessarily want to say that that's wrong or it's predatory, but you're definitely not getting your money's worth, especially with the technical limitation. But both of those are really dwarfed by the ownership problem. And in order to understand the ownership problem, we have to explore a situation that I ran into a few years ago. So, a company I was working with had a website that they were hosting with their web designer. Everything was great until one day, everything went offline. And long story short, the web designer just up and left. She no longer wanted to design websites. She wasn't passionate anymore. She just kind of ghosted everybody. And so these companies have been paying their bill. She forgot about renewing her subscription or something. I don't know what happened on her end, but all of the websites that were in that account went offline for failure to pay the bill. She hadn't paid. And so none of these websites were able to contact the web host, which was HostGator, and say, hey, we need to bring this website back online because it wasn't their account. They were effectively leasing the files of their website from her, and they didn't own them. Matter of fact, they didn't even own their domain names. She had transferred them to her business and then registered them in her name and then was charging these small businesses for them. And I don't think she was doing so to be malicious. I don't think she was trying to steal their domain names. She had no problem releasing them once we eventually got a hold of her. But getting a hold of her was a problem. And if we had never been able to get a hold of her, we could have very well lost those domain names and lost those files completely. The business had to get a lawyer involved. We ended up tracking her down because she had closed up her shop without saying anything and decided just to start working for her parents' flooring store or something like that. So that's how we ended up finding her. The lawyer ended up finding her somehow. And so she released all the files to us. But can you imagine if that had never been the case and weeks had gone by and weeks turned into months that the website was down, all of the value that the website had, the domain name is lost, all of the emails on those servers were lost. I mean, that could bankrupt a company because they did not own their domain. And it may not be such a big deal at like an agency where you've got 20, 50 employees, but it's especially problematic for a freelancer where you have one point of contact. And if that point of contact gets in an accident, or God forbid, passes away, and they're the person that has all the keys to the domains and they're the ones that owns everything about your business, that's bad. And it's something to really be considering when you are in a position of buying your web hosting. You should have autonomy over your files. And that brings us to 515 hosting and web design. So I work as a freelancer right now designing websites, but I also sell web hosting. But the way that I approach it is not by having a shared web hosting plan. I actually have a partnership with a data center in Chicago. I have multiple data center partnerships, but the way my business is structured is that you always have your own dashboard. You always have immediate access to your files and your ability to work with the data center and the tech support teams and the billing teams there directly. I exist as a middleman only in the sense that I can access your account just as any other tech support agent could there. And so I can help you directly as a local web designer / admin, and you can pay me and I can pay them. I work as a middleman that's not necessary, but conveniently in the middle. And that's the primary difference. Your domain name is registered in your name as the registrar has your account information on file. All of the WHOIS information is on you and your business. You can always access your files. If you want to fire me as a web designer and hire somebody else and still maintain use of the web hosting plan, I'm completely indifferent to that. I hope that your experience with me would suggest that that's not going to be the case, that you're going to want to continue to work with me. But there's no reason that you couldn't do that. Nobody's stopping you. You have your own passwords. This is critical to running a successful business in the long term that doesn't require one point of failure bringing everything down related to the website. And that is why you probably shouldn't use your web designer for your web hosting unless it's a company like 515 Hosting and Web Design.